Name is got the notification for recording. Always lovely when you're starting to introduce yourself and that happens. Anyway, hello everybody. My name is Willie Schaefer. I'm the Adobe specialist here at UTSA, and I'm going to be guiding you along on a little bit of a journey today through Adobe Illustrator. And I won't lie to you, when I first started using Adobe Illustrator, I was a little bit frightened of it. And I think that's kind of what I hear from a lot of people is there's a lot going on and there are a lot of different tools that are available to you inside of Illustrator. But what we're going to talk about today are the key tools that you will use if you want to use Illustrator for things like postering sessions. We're going to talk about how to add in images, how to add in text, how to do basic layout. And we're also going to talk a little bit about AI because everybody's talking about AI right now. So on this journey, it should be pretty easy, but if you get stuck on anything, remember this is being recorded for you, so you can come back and watch that later. So don't hesitate to rewatch it. Whenever I'm doing something, I always try to be sure that I review it a few times. The other thing, and I'll probably mention this later on, when you get to practice this, do something fun. Do something for you. Don't start off with a serious project. Do a fun project to practice first. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to jump right into Illustrator. I'm going to share my screen so you can see what's going on, and we're going to talk about how to get started. So let me go ahead and share my screen and hit share. All right. So here we are in Illustrator. And with Illustrator, I'm going to bring this down just a hair so you can see that better. What we have here is the Learn tab. Typically, you start off on Home, but I always like to show folks this Learn tab right here, because if you want to go beyond what we're talking about today, we have an hour together. So I can't get through every single aspect of Illustrator. If you want to go further, if you want to learn about creating and editing shapes, something we really don't have time for today, you can go in this and learn how to do it. So that's a great place to start. Now, with this, the name of it kind of says what it does. Illustrator, illustration, right? So if we're illustrating, we're creating graphics, we're creating images. And what those images are vectors. Vectors are essentially mathematical data. So numbers that represent graphics. When we think of a JPEG, we take a photo with our phone, that's a JPEG. That is roster based. And the great thing about Illustrator, when we create content in Illustrator that is vector based, we can blow it up all day long and never lose quality. Whereas with a photo, we've all done this before where we've tried to crop a photo or blow up an older photo and you lose quality. Now, we're going to be talking about photos as well today, but the key thing to remember here is that photos are raster images, and we'll talk about that. And everything in Illustrator is vector, okay? Vector scale, raster images do have a limit to their scalability. All right, so back into Illustrator again. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say new file. You can also go to File, New, Control N or Command N if you want a shortcut. But I'm just going to do this big blue button. And with this, we have different options here. So we have print, we have web, we have recent, we have saved. If I go into print here, for example, we can see that we have a typical letter size. If we go into web, we have different screen sizes. If I go into recent, we can see some different options and things that I've been trying recently. But what I want to do is go into print. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this up as a poster. Now, I'm going to go with a typical poster size and use that, but you will have to make sure that you're doing your research on it. Over here on the left-hand side, I'm going to give this a title. I'm going to call this Demo. And with that, I'm also going to give it a size. Now, by default, we can see that this is in points. If I hit this drop down here, I can say, do I want this in points, pixels, picas, or picas if you're a Pokemon fan, inches, feet in inches, yard, millimeters, centimeters, whatever works for you. I'm an American. I think in inches. And I believe typical poster size is something like 48 inches by 36 inches. And again, this is a typical size. If you're doing a postering session for somebody, be sure you're checking those requirements. With this over here, we can choose the orientation. If we want this to be a portrait, a taller piece, or a landscape, a wider piece, we can choose the number of artboards. So for this, for a poster, we probably don't need more than one. Artboards are like pages. The more, if you have 2 artboards, it's like 2 pieces of paper. If you have 1 artboard, it's like 1 piece of paper. Here we have bleed. If you are working with a printer, you can ask them for your specifications on bleed. I'm going to leave that blank. For color mode here, we can see that this is in CMYK, and that stands for cyan, magenta, yellow, and key also meaning black for color process. So when you're printing, this is the process mode you're using. Now, if you knew you were creating something for the web, you would choose RGB color, red, green, blue, because this is what we see when we look at screens. Screens are made of red, greens, and blues. Prints are made of CMYK. Here you can see roster effects. And I just said, hey, we're not doing roster today. We're doing vector. Well, what this means is when you bring in a photo, because you're probably going to have to bring in a photo at some point. We're going to bring in photos today. That photo is going to come at 300 pixels per inch. Now, if you're doing something related to research, if you're doing something related to publishing, you might also see this listed as DPI, dots per inch. Pixels per inch and dots per inch, pretty much the same way of saying this. Pixels per inch is just a newer way of saying it. So do realize when you see that it should be fine. And we're going to leave more settings as it is and hit create. So again, we've just given it a size. We've said landscape, CMYK, 300 PPI, create. And then we come in, and I'm going to close out some of these windows that I don't need right now. I have a lot of stuff open because I was working on something earlier. And we have our piece of paper. And we can think of this exactly like a piece of paper. So when we are working at a desk, and here is our desktop, and here is the piece of paper we're drawing on, this is what we have now. And so just like a real desk, if I go over here and I go to, let's say, the rectangle tool, and I make a rectangle, if I make that rectangle on my desk, it's not going to appear on my piece of paper. When I go to print this, everything in this gray area is not going to be there. It's just of the mind. It's not a real actual thing. So a lot of times when I'm working, I'll put notes out here, colors, if I need to reference a color, if I need to reference a font, something like that. This is kind of my area where I keep my notes. And then this is where I actually create my project here. I'm going to delete that really quick. If you ever need to delete something, it's simple as selecting it, hitting the delete key on the keyboard. Very, very easy to do things like that. What I like to do when I first get started is think about layout. Now, this is something that I feel hinders a lot of people as they get into Illustrator, because they're just like, things go here and things go here and things go here and all the things go everywhere. But what we need to think about are kind of sort of laying things out in a grid. We want to create a grid of information that's easy to read. And a lot of people at this point are like, well, if you're just doing grids, why aren't you just using PowerPoint? PowerPoint is very limiting. The quality of it is very dated. And a lot of people are like, well, you know, it's really easy because I was doing this postering session and they gave me the template for PowerPoint and I'm just going to do it in that. And something to remember with this is that we want to stand out, right? When you are doing a postering session, you want your information to jump out and grab people. And by thinking about our layout, we can really help our piece stand out. We can make it unique. We can make people look at it. Now, just to give you an example, I've talked about this example a million times before, but it is the honest truth. I do research in eye tracking, and I am not the greatest researcher ever. I'm a professor. I'm a teacher. I'm a lecturer. I'm very new to the research field. I went to a postering session as part of a conference with my very basic research that I've been working on with my team, and people were looking at it, people were interested in it. And it's not because we were doing the most groundbreaking research ever, it was because our poster was, well, in my humble opinion, the best one there. It stood out, and if you make a strong poster, people are gonna pay more attention to it. And if any of you have been in postering session, you know that kinda awkward feeling where you're, like, standing by your work, hoping someone's gonna look at it and talk to you. Well, if you make that visually stronger, you're more likely to have that. Now, the thing to remember is that we're all conditioned to like aesthetically pleasing things. It's just the nature of humanity. We've all been advertised to since the moment we are aware of things. We have always consumed advertising. This is another form of advertising. It's another form of marketing. You're just marketing your data. So we're going to think about layout. Now, we're going to do a very basic layout today, but I highly suggest, if you're interested in this, start looking at different styles of layouts, grids, guides, the Swiss kind of layout. There's different ways you can think about layout, but I'm going to do a simple one. I'm going to teach you how to do this today. So let's go ahead back in Illustrator. And what I want to do is one of my favorite shortcuts. It is Control R here in Illustrator. And if you're on a Mac, that's Command R. Control R or Command R. This will add a ruler to my piece. So now I can use it to help me measure things, to help lay things out. And it's going to be very, very, very helpful in something I'm going to do in a minute. The first thing I want to do here is I'm going to create a reference shape. Now, you don't have to do this. This helps my brain. It works for me. Doesn't have to be what you do, but this is what I like to do. I go to the rectangle and I start to think about my spacing. Now, for this demo, I'm going to give everything a 1-inch spacing around it. So if I go to my rectangle tool and all I do is click on the white area, it tells me that I can create a rectangle. And I'm going to say I want that to be 1 inch by 1 inch. And this could be any size. It could be 2 inches, 5 inches, whatever you want. I'm just doing 1 inch by 1 inch. And when I create that, you can see that over here for my colors, this little hollow thing is a stroke. And if I click off of this, you can see there's a black line around that. That is my stroke. The white is my fill. Well, what I'm going to do is I want no stroke, which is this little red line here. If I have stroke selected, select the red line, you can see there's no longer a black box around it. All right, for fill, if I double click on this white box, I can change the color. I'm going to make this green. I just want it to be ugly. I'm probably not going to have anything green on my piece here. So I know that this is just a design element that I'm using to reference. It could be any color. It could be pink. It could be purple. It could be chartreuse. I don't care. Whatever helps you design. What I like to do with this, first step, I shove this up in the corner. Okay. And then I'm going to use my rulers. And what my rulers are going to allow me to do, if I click on my ruler and drag over, I can use that to line up with my box. And I can click and drag. And what I'm doing is I'm creating guides. So what I'm doing is I want to create a margin all the way around my page. And what I like to think about it, there's a couple different ways, but I'm in the Halloween spirit right now. And I like to think about the old zombie films where you have a group of people in a house and the zombies are trying to get in. Well, if that person in the house gets too close to a window, the zombie comes in and gets them. This is what I think about with my text, my data, my content. If I don't give a little bit of a margin there, the zombies are going to get into my data. We give these spaces to give breathing room for our type and for our content. Just like you and I, content needs room to breathe and to rest. A lot of people, when they first start designing, they put everything everywhere and they give no space for the eye to rest. It's like a run-on sentence. If someone was just talking and talking and talking, much like myself, and they never paused and stopped, it feels a little awkward. So I always try with my speaking to take pauses and take little breaks. And when I'm designing, I always try to give things breathing room. So back to Illustrator again. I've created those lines there. And these lines, when I create these guides, they are lines of the mind. They're not really there. They're invisible. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take that same green box. I'm just dragging it down into the corner over here. Again, I'm just clicking on the ruler and dragging. That's all I'm doing. And then I'm just lining it up with that box. All right. And that one wasn't quite right. That's okay. I can always move these. Click and drag. And now I have my margins of my page, the things that I don't want to go beyond. So what I want to do now is actually start thinking about layout. Now, if you're old school and you like, having a piece of paper and saying, I'm going to sketch it out, you can do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show y'all how to do this digitally, how to sketch digitally, and then to create your piece from it. Now, the great thing about doing these digital sketches as well is if you're doing different posters for different things, you can essentially turn this into a template. Makes your life a lot easier. So I'm going to go ahead and do my layout. Now, with that, I want to think about another window that I want to have open. When I'm working, I like to have a lot of different things open. But the first thing I want is window and layers. Window, layers. And layers is like, kind of think of it like pieces of paper, right? Right now we have one layer, one piece of paper. And with this, I just have my graphic on here. So I'm just going to call this like ref for reference. You can call it Steve if you want to. It doesn't matter. I'm just doing that to help me know that this is where my reference object is. Down here, your layers panel might be attached to the side. Mine, I always break it off and move it around. I like to move things around. And at the bottom of that screen, you'll see create new layer. Create new layer will allow you to do exactly that, create a new layer. And so with that, I can double click on this and I can say photos. So I'm going to have a layer for my photos. I'm going to hit plus, double click, and I'm going to say text. Plus, double click, and I'm going to say graphics. With these, I can move these around. If I don't like the order of them, I can always change them later. But for right now, this is the way they are. And the first thing I want to think about is kind of graphic that's going to help get people into the piece. And so I'm going to go to graphics, and I'm going to just make a shape. I'm going to use that same rectangle tool we looked at before. Remember before I just clicked once? Well, check this out. If I click and drag, I can draw a box. It's still that ugly green color, but we can change that. And now I have a graphic at the top of my piece. With this, it's kind of a boring shape. Well, check this out. If I go up here to selection, grab the circle, I can curve those corners. So if I wanted to make a more rounded shape in here, I could do that. And again, with this, if I go in here, I can change the color of this piece. And I'm going to go with like a nice kind of light blue color. And I have the first bit of my graphics. Now, for right now, I think that's going to be the only graphic I have at the moment. I might come back and change that later. The next thing I want to do is to think about where I can either do text or photos. Depends on what you are and who you are and how you think about how you want to start doing your layout. But I want to start thinking about columns. Whenever I'm designing, I'm thinking about columns of content. And so I'm going to start laying out those columns, and I'm going to do one column of text and photos. And I'm going to start with photos because I'm a very visual person. And when I do this, I'm just going to use that rectangle tool again, same tool we just used. And I'm going to use reds for this just to help my brain. So I'm on the photos layer. I know that I want to have a big photo here to start. And then after that, I want to have some type. And this photo, it could be a photo, it could be a graph, it could be anything. but I'm just going to leave it as is. And then for text, I'm going to say, okay, same shape tool, but maybe I want to make this, let's just say purple here. I'm just going to be, oh, I still had it selected. Oh no, I changed the color. If you still have something selected, it will change it. Control Z, Command Z, just like anything else, make sure you're unselected before you change the color. Made a little mistake there, but it's okay. All right, make sure I'm on my text layer, and I'm going to drag my box for this. Now, check this out. I want to start to think about my little ugly green box because I can start to use this to lay things out. And I see, oh, I made that pretty close to an inch right there, right? So maybe next I want to think about my next column. Okay, so I'm going to grab this text box here. I'm going to do a typical copy and paste. Control C, Control V, Command C, Command V if you're on a Mac. Copy, paste. And I'm making a second column. And check this out. It even shows when I'm lining up with things. You can see at the top, there's a little purple line saying that I'm lined up here. So I'm starting to make my next column. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a couple of columns here just to see how my whole layout looks together. And I might adjust this as I'm going. And pull this green block over. And I still have that copied, so I can still paste it, Control V or Command V. And maybe this one just goes a little bit like this. And I'm just kind of roughing it out right now and how I want it to look. And then back into my text one, paste. And maybe I want this one to go back up again and line up. All right. And then one more over here, paste. Oh, accidentally pasted that on the reference image. We can see that right there on the layers. I didn't have text selected. Always undo, Control Z. Make sure you have the right layer selected, paste. Now, you don't have to work all across the layers like I am, but it is helpful. Okay, so we can see here that this doesn't quite fit. And that's okay. There's a couple of different things we could do. The quick and dirty solution is to simply select all these. I'm going to hold down the Shift key. I'm just clicking with the Shift key held down. Grab the corner and then resizing them to fit in here. I can do that. Now, the realization with that is that's going to make your box might be not quite perfectly matched up with that 1 inch, but it's pretty darn close, and I think you can get by with it. But if you are more interested in getting that exact, remember, you can always go in here to your shape, click, and define an exact size for this. You don't have to click and pull and click and pull. You can always define exact size. So if you want to do out all the math first, make sure everything's exact, you can always do that. All right. So now what I'm going to do is the same thing, except for I'm going to go to Photos, right? Black arrow, click on this bad boy right here, copy, Control C, paste, Control V, and oh, it pasted behind that. That's okay. I can always move it over here, paste, and then this one is going to be a little bit different in size. So I can grab that bottom of that box and scale it, paste. Oh, accidentally grabbed it. It's okay. Control Z, Command Z. This is something that you'll learn to get used to with Illustrator, is that undo is your friend. I do mistakes all the time. I've been using Illustrator for almost 25 years now and still make mistakes with it. Paste. And I'm just getting, again, a rough layout of what my poster is going to look like. I might change this as I go, but at least it gives me an idea. And paste. Now I'm going to make this box a little bit shorter because I want to do one other fun thing with a photo in this. And what I want to do, that's not quite lined up. There we go. What I want to do is I want to actually have a bit of a photo cutting into my title here. So go back to photos, and we don't have to only use rectangles. If I go to the rectangle tool and click and hold, I have a rounded rectangle, an ellipse, a polygon, a star, and we're not going to worry about flare. Ellipse is a circle. If I click and drag, it makes it all kinds of weird shapes. But if I hold down the shift key here, it will keep it straight and make it a perfect circle. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make this a perfect circle and drag it over a little bit. Now, for those of you who are paying close attention, you're like, Willie, that's going behind the graphic there. And more than likely, you don't want that photo to go behind the graphic. Well, remember what I said earlier about layers. I can always move this graphical layer underneath. All I do is click and drag those layers, and I can drag them where I want them to live. So if I drag it up here, it'll go on top. If I drag it down here, it'll go below. I have control over that. And so now I have a really rough layout of what my piece is going to look like. Well, right now, this doesn't look like much of anything, but my suggestion is if you're creating this, at this point, I would save. So, File, Save, and this will save as a .ai file. And this is becoming a big point of confusion for folks lately because AI here means Adobe Illustrator. It doesn't mean that it's using AI right now. So Adobe Illustrator file. And the reason I say save this here is because this has become a template. If I ever need to use it for a poster again, I already have a layout done and I don't have to go through that again. Easy peasy. But I'm not going to save it for real. I just want to show you that I can do that. What I want to do now is start making this more visually appealing. And I made a little mistake here. That should be a red because it is going to be a photo. Check this out. Eyedropper tool. Boom. Hit the red. You can always sample things. And I want to make this a photo. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use stock photos for this. Now, one of the things I recommend for everyone to use, if you need just general photos, is stock.adobe.com. Again, that's stock.adobe.com. And stock.adobe.com allows you to download files that you can use for your piece. They're high resolution. Again, when I put a photo in here, it's a raster photo going into these vectors. All these I can blow up for days. I can stretch out forever, but a photo has its limits. If you're taking a photo of yourself, make sure it's a high quality photo. I'm going to pretend that the photo I'm going to use is me for this presentation. To add a photo in, I'm going to go to File, and then Place. File, Place. And this is how you always bring in images. File, Place. And I'm going to go to my stock photos folder. It's here in Graphics and Adobe Stock and Photos. And I'm going to use this gentleman here for my photo. And with this, a lot of people just instantly click it and instantly go down to Place, which will place the file into it. But there is a very important thing to pay attention to in here. If I'm working collaboratively with somebody and we're sharing Illustrator files back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right now, link is selected. What that means is the file that I put in here is linked to on my computer. So if I send this to my coworker, Haley, she is going to get an error that the linked file is missing. If you are sharing this with somebody to edit, just uncheck that link box. It will make your Illustrator file larger because it means that the file is actually being stored inside the Illustrator file. But again, if you're working collaboratively with somebody or working across multiple computers, this is something you want to take into consideration. If it's just you on your computer, no biggie. It's just me on my computer, no biggie. I'm going to say place. When I place a file, I get what Adobe calls the gun. And this allows me to click and drag my photo as large as I want it to be. And you're like, Willie, what's going on? You can't even see the circle anymore. Well, there's a little trick to this, okay? I'm going to show you guys that trick. What I want to do is I'm going to pull this down just so I can see the circle and the man. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and select the circle. So both the man and the circle are selected now. I'm going to do this a few times, so if it's a little tricky, don't worry. I'm going to go to Object. Then I'm going to go to, I always forget where this is. Clipping mask, there it is, and Make. Object, clipping mask, make. And what this is going to do is going to make a mask for this person so he fits into the circle. So watch this. Object, clipping mask, make. And oh, let's try that one more time with feeling. Select both these guys. There we go. Object, clipping mask, make. Well, isn't that funny how things sometimes don't work? Let's see here. I apologize, y'all. Let me try that one more time with feeling and see if I can figure out why that was being so funky. File. And we're going to go to place. Select both. Object. Well, that is just fun. I was doing this just the other day, and now it's not letting me do it for whatever reason. Well, since that is being a pain, we're just going to go another way about it. I apologize for that difficulty. That should technically work, but since it's not, I'm just going to delete that circle. I'm going to take this gentleman, grab the corner, hold down shift and resize. I can still put him in as a square in here. Not quite as interesting, but it's something. And then I'll have to come back and find out why that's not working. I don't want to spend too much time of our demo doing that. And I can do the same thing with my other photos. So I'm going to go to File and Place. And I'm going to use this photo here, say Place. And I'm just going to start to draw out my piece in here. And with this, let's see if I can get that one to work. Let's see if it'll let me work on this one, if it was just not liking that. Object, mask make. Yeah, I am not sure why it's being so picky today. Well, we can do it. We can work around it. So I'm going to delete that. I'm going to hold down shift, grab this corner. I'm going to resize this box just a little bit. We can always work around our limitations and make things work. Still looks good. I'm going to go ahead and put my other photo in here. File and Place. And then I want to choose another photo that I can use for this piece. And I will use this one here. And I'm just going to drag that in. And it just means, again, I need to do a little bit of adjusting on my layout. That's okay. Try that one more time. Grab that bottom, drag it down. And I'm just going to go through and get these other ones done really quick. File, Place, and we'll just keep doing that over and over again until we have our piece sort of laid out. And you can see here, if you get comfortable with Illustrator, you don't even necessarily have to use these boxes to lay things out. It's just a helpful thing if you've never done layout before. So I sometimes will just go in and I'll start throwing things in. But if you're not super familiar with layout, this is a good way to get yourself more comfortable with it and create that content. All right, that one goes a little bit too long, but that's okay. We'll fix that up, fix this up. And I'm going to do 2 more photos and be done with this. So File, Place. And then bring that down. Drag that down. And then one more time. File, Place. All right. So now I have my pieces, my photos in here. Again, these are photos, but it could be anything. It could be that this is data. that these are graphs, any kind of thing here. And now I want to start putting my text in. So there's a couple of different ways that I could go about doing this. The easiest way, I think, a lot of times is to come up here, especially if you don't know what you're writing yet, is to come up here to your type tool. And then where I've made these boxes, if I hover over the corner, probably hard to see on your screen, but it'll give me a circle with the prompt in it. And if I click on that, it fills it with placeholder type. So this is filled with lorem ipsum now. That's really hard to read. But I want to change that. Now, if you're using the most latest version of Illustrator, it has this context window that comes open. So if I want to change the point size of that, I can do that right there. If I want to change the font of that, I can do that right there as well. And you can see what that looks like with a different font. Now, something to remember for these as you're doing postering sessions is what they look like from a distance. And a lot of times what I do when I'm checking this out, little shortcut here, Control minus or Command minus on Mac, or Control plus. Minus zooms out, plus zooms in. So if you want to see what this looks like across the room or close up, you can use that plus and minus to do that. So I can see, across the room, this type might be a little hard to read. Well, maybe I want to go with a larger point size. This isn't a paper that we're doing where people are going to be up this close to it. We want to think about distance. Now, with this, again, this is just placeholder text. It's not an actual real thing. But if it were a real thing, something to pay attention to, down here in the bottom corner, and this is kind of hard to see. Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit. And I'm just using that same Control plus. There is a red plus box here. And what that says is that our type is too big for this text box. There's not enough room for that text in there. So if I click off and then click on that red box, it should allow me to overflow that type. Now, I'm probably going to have to be on the text tool for that. And then let's see, it is not wanting to do. Man, Illustrator is just being picky with me today. I apologize, y'all. But it should let me overflow from that plus if I click into this next box. And again, there we go. It let me overflow. And this is the extra text. And then I could just delete this content here. Now, the great thing is about this is if I go in here and I had to add something else, since this is overflowing, you can see this is overflowing from one to the next. So something, something, something. It's overflowing those boxes. And then this box is too small now, but I can always change the size of this box and make it so that overflow text fits in to this page as well. Now, with this, as I'm going through, I can go through and use what I've created already. So check this out. If I go in here, I've been doing this type. If I click in here, again, it gives me that circle with the prompt. I can click in there. It fills it, and it's using the same font. If for whatever reason the font changes on you, let's say it goes to something like this. Really cool trick, that eyedropper we looked at earlier. I can eyedrop this other text, and it will bring back that other font. It might be hard to see from how zoomed out we are, so let me zoom in. So just again to show you that if I was in this font, go to eyedropper, I can eyedrop this text, and boom, it changes to that font size, style, and color. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and do that for the rest of these. Same thing, it's just kind of repetitive. Click on the text, go up here to the circle, boom, fill, and boom, fill. Those are all done. But I forgot a key ingredient. I forgot to do my headlines. What are the big, bold things that are going to get people interested in this piece? So I'm going to make these text boxes a little bit smaller. And then I'm going to add type in. Now, if you remember last time, we were just clicking into a shape and creating type. There's another trick we can do if we go to the type tool and just do a single click on an empty area. This will create type outside of a text box. Everything we've been doing so far has been in a box. This is outside of a box. So I can say a headline. And I want to make that big and beefy and noticeable. So I'm going to select that type. And I'm going to go and choose a headline font here, something big and beefy, and a big point size. I can also come in here and use the arrow key on the keyboard to resize it. If you want way more control, you can go to Window, Type, Character. Window, Type, Character, Control T or Command T if you're on a Mac. This is a window I typically have open. It has all my details about my font, the size, everything about it. Really easy to use. Now, remember earlier when I was saying with that eyedropper, if I eyedrop this font here, it would change back to this font. But if I eyedrop an object, check this out. If I have that headline selected and eyedrop my color up here, boom, I can use that color in my headline. And now I'm tying that content to the content at the top of the screen. Really smart way to think about things. So now I want to go in and make a couple of headlines. Well, I can resize these. I could do this in layout too. If I knew I wanted to have some headline boxes, I could have done that when I was doing layout. Or I can simply come in here, Control C, Control V, Command C, Command V if you're on a Mac, and start placing those in to the different places where I might want some sort of information. Paste again, and say headline. All right. And then also with this, I probably want some other text. Maybe I want up here to be something about the name of my research. Name of research. It is super cool. So with that, what I want to do is I can actually, when I click and do that type outside of the text box, I can modify this. Even though it's the same piece of type, I can modify each element just by selecting it. So if I select this type here and say I want this to be a white, just double click on that color, you can see even though this is the same bit of text, even though it's still together, I can select an area and change it. If I wanted to go in and select this and make it larger, again, I can come over here to this and do that. So I'm just going to go in. I can use the arrow key to do that right here. Actually, I was in the wrong thing there. Make that larger. I could punch in a number. I'm just going to use about right there. And then I want this, it's super cool, to be like a subtitle. So if I select this here, again, I can change that point size to go smaller, but I can also change the leading, the spacing vertically. So if I shrink that down, you can see it's getting tighter. Or the tracking, which is the horizontal spacing. So if I wanted that to be stretched out a little bit, I can make it super cool, stretch out. If I go into paragraph, I could set that to different alignments. And you're like, oh, why didn't that work? Well, it's trying to only align the bottom. If I select both of them, I can line them up and then have my piece go something like that. Because that bottom text is black, I could cut through the blue into the white. I have a lot of different options here. So you really have a ton of control over this. Now, what I said before, file, save. Remember, this is saving it as an AI file. This is our editing file. This is a file where it has all of our fonts, all of our colors, our artboards, our guides, all of our bits and pieces that we're using to create. So I, at this point, would always hit save. I'd hit save usually if I'm making a template out of it, and I'd hit save here as I'm close to being finished up. And then with this, I want to show you in this save, there's also another option. If you're sending this to somebody to view, if you're sending this to somebody to share through an email, in this drop down here, we have the option to save it as a PDF, an EPS, or even an SVG. So if you're doing research and you're familiar with SVGs, you have that SVG option in there. PDF is what I'm going to use right now. Say OK and hit save. Now, this is going to be my file that I can share with people. With this, there's a couple of things to pay attention to in here. One, preserve Illustrator editing capabilities. And with that, the thing to remember here is if I share this PDF with that checked and I send it off to a collaborator, they can take that PDF and open it in Illustrator and modify it. If I do not want my collaborators, I love my research folks that I work with, but they're not designers. If I don't want them to change it, I can uncheck that option so it's harder for them to change. So I do that a lot of times. The other thing that I check in here is compression. Now, what this is saying is right now with images, it's using a zip compression on those images. The quality is going to be slightly lower. It's not downsampling them, it's not crushing them, but it is compressing them. You can always change this to no compression at all if you want to keep it higher quality. A lot of times when I'm taking an Illustrator file and sending it to a printer to print, I will send them a PDF with editing turned off, compression none. That's one of the things that I always do. The rest of this we're not going to worry too much, but then we'd hit save PDF. Let's say you need a digital version of this too, though. File, export, and we have a couple of export options down here. We have export for screens, export as, and save for web legacy. Typically what I do in here is I will take this and I will save it as an AI file. I'll save it as a PDF to send to printer. And then if I need to share it through an email or online, I will do save for web legacy. And the reason I like this option here is because of, let me make this smaller so you guys can see everything. It popped up this quite large here. So I have control over the scale of this and the quality of this. I can say that this is a GIF, a JPEG, or a PNG. I can say what pixel size this is. So if I needed to be a specific, I needed it to be like a 1080 pixel, not 1080 by whatever, I can scale it down. Obviously, you're going to lose quality, but you can do that. The key thing to remember about this, though, when I'm doing this, the reason I save as an AI and a PDF first, because this is turning into a JPEG, a GIF, or a PNG. That means this is going to now be a raster-based image instead of a vector-based image. All of my graphical shapes now are going to be pixels rather than vectors. In my AI, still vectors. In my PDF, still vectors. In this, it's raster-based. So do realize this. Another reason I like to do this is if I need to share this with somebody who might have a slower internet connection. I work with researchers from around the world, and sometimes they don't have the best internet capabilities. Well, I can take this and I can crush this down to fit into an email and say, hey, what do you guys think of this? It looks great. I can't quite read the data on that. Can you send that to me as text? And then I can send them the text file, and they're not getting these giant files. It's a lot easier to share those things. Just do remember, once I hit save on this, this is saving as a raster version of that photo. So with that, that was a ton of data in a very short amount of time, but I want to make sure that there's time for questions. I know we got to stop that recording first, and then we'll get into those questions. So you can throw them in the chat or you can jump on and ask them.